Black History Month you find
Ridiculous.
why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? No, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
Do you want one?
No.
No, I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
How are we going to get rid of racism until...
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me as Morgan Freeman.
Hey everybody, Jamie Starr here. Welcome to the White Boy Black History Month special. So, I got this idea for this video because some friends of mine from high school are doing a podcast, bunch of interviews, really high quality, really good. I'll put a link to their channel in the description. Shout out to them. But you know, I constantly talk about how I was in this weird situation in a majority black high school, being the minority, very accepted. I mean, I'm shouted out on hip hop songs as the white boy's the realest nigga here. The other week I had a dude from Africa be like, "Oh, I heard your music. I thought you were black. Then I saw a picture of you, but after talking to you, I realized you are black." And after the whole George Floyd BLM making its 4-year resurgence like leap year, I put together this script because I was going to put out a documentary video type thing about basically a modern version of the documentary Anarchy USA from 1966, I believe, by G.H. Griffin, which talks about the communist underpinnings in Black America. It's why it's called the Black Community. And I kind of didn't end up following through with it, mainly because BLM really started to get recognized for what I said it was in the beginning. You can check my interview with Rez1 about how I was warning about the Marxist underpinning of this movement and how it was ultimately would be detrimental towards black people if we followed through on the things they want. You know, a lot of people, regardless of their political background, would say fatherlessness is one of the biggest problems in the black community. It's a big problem in the white community. Problem with any community. It takes two to tango, and there's a reason. You should obviously have the two around after the fact. But, you know, they had these crazy ideas like abolish the nuclear family and stuff like that. The founders started doing like pagan witchcraft rituals out in public, and everyone sort of recognized that it was this corporate tool for fundraising and for elections and stuff like that. It is still a very big corporate propaganda mechanism, which I'm sure I get into in this. I don't want to extrapolate too much because I haven't reread this, but I figured it would be worth delving into. And then I have some other things to say because for anyone who watches my news channel, you probably know my views on this, but I have a sort of Malcolm X, Kanye West, Dick Gregory sort of view on what white supremacy is. And the reality of it is the actual white supremacy is like the people who print money. The actual white supremacy really doesn't give a fuck that much about race. It's far more of a class issue. And then they use racism within the lower class to keep everyone fighting and divided and such. So no one ever joins together. There's been memes going around recently about how towards the end of Occupy Wall Street, all the news media just like, I mean, you can do Google trend charts on it, and the mentions of racism in the news media just exploded. So they didn't want people uniting as a working class, lower class coalition against the elites and the 1%. So what did the elite and the 1% do? Well, they convinced everyone that all of the other races are actually their enemies. So black people are supposed to hate white people are supposed to hate Mexicans and Jews, Mexicans are supposed to hate black people, so on and so forth. Divide and conquer, it's as old as time. So anyway, let's get into what I wrote out, and hopefully it's not awful. It's become overwhelmingly clear that no amount of data or stats is going to change people's perception on the current state of race relations in America, or the world for that matter, when you have an anti-police brutality protest talking about the injustices against black people in countries with virtually no black people. This we saw after the George Floyd thing, where you'd have countries like France and Ireland and all of these countries that have no black people basically trying to appropriate America's police brutality issue. And I say issue like that because we're a country of like 300 million something people, and the amount of people that are murdered by cops a year is like not even in the hundreds. Like, it's extremely low. Now, there's a prison problem. That's a whole separate issue. But this idea that cops are willy-nilly shooting people is just not factually based. And I'm not saying there aren't problems with policing or anything like that. I'm just saying it's very weird how... Well, it's not weird. It's... What the media does is they overblow minor issues because then it becomes very contentious, because it emotionally riles people up. Obviously, nobody enjoys seeing someone hurt or abused or anything like that. But when you can hyper focus on a super small issue that's barely a real problem and get everyone all wrapped up in that, well, then there starts to be these elephants in the room that no one's talking about. So anyway, the reality of the situation is this is not a movement of the people. In fact, it is the complete opposite, and it is everything it claims to be fighting against. Black Lives Matter and all of its shoot-off organizations are colonialist movements propagating white supremacy. Its slogan, Black Lives Matter, is propaganda perfection. We see it constantly. Denial of the political movement and its objectives get distorted into denial of the assertion that Black Lives Matter. The reality is, if BLM had so much concern for Black lives, why does it focus on issues that kill under 20 people a year? And me saying under 20 is extremely generous when in 2019, only 9 unarmed black men were killed by police, and in half of those, justice was served where the use of force was deemed unlawful, resulting in officers facing repercussions. BLM, however, has amassed a great amount of wealth and power while offering very little to the communities it claims to represent. And that's because the majority of the money they raise goes to Democrats. Black people already vote like 80 to 90% for Democrats. So all Black Lives Matter is a reinforcement of the status quo. It's not seeking to change anything. It's seeking to keep the people in power. That's why all these corporations back it. So to first understand everything we're about to talk about here, we need to first accept a few things. American politics is mostly divided into two sides, left and right, Democrat and Republican. The major difference between these two parties is most easily that the Democrats is a collectivist party while the Republicans are individualist. During the 60s, there was concern that the civil rights movement was being co-opted, not only by domestic efforts like the FBI with COINTELPRO, but also foreign adversaries like Soviet communists. The latter bit of history seems to be almost forgotten. However, its influence is alive and well when you have leaders like Barack Obama, who spent summers during his youth with well-known Soviet communist propagandist Frank Marshall Davis. The ties between these two, Davis and Obama's mother, Ann Dunham, were so strong that some suspect Davis to be Obama's real father. Even his brother Malik is requesting a DNA test, and this would provide reason why birtherism became such an overplayed distraction, because it was never about where he was born, but it was about who he was the son of. During these times, numerous black leaders like Malcolm X also spoke about the white liberal and the dangers they posed to the black community. As the civil rights movements of the past were plagued by numerous political interest groups, from international Jewish bankers and lawyers, government intelligence agencies, and foreign communist agitators, the same is true today. A quote is often attributed to Vladimir Lenin: "The best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves." This is why we see a Marxist movement such as Black Lives Matter backed up by every multinational capitalist corporation, while the movement itself espouses anti-capitalist views. The communist influence of the civil rights movement is most evident in the way that identity groups get referred to as communities. The Black community, the gay community, the trans community, the Latinx community. Side note on Latinx, isn't it really cute how a bunch of college-educated white liberal academics have suddenly decided that all the Spanish languages are like transphobic? So white people have taken it upon themselves to colonialize the Spanish language? I mean, this is, again, the things they say they're fighting against is exactly what they're doing. I mean, I've met these people. They hold their little seminars at Vassar College, and they're like, "Oh, we need to rework the Spanish language." I'm serious. A bunch of overpaid white academics get in a room together and basically get to tell all the minority groups how phobic their language is and how we need to rewrite it for them. It's fucking ridiculous. Let's see. This is a tactic often related to colonialism. It is the erasing of group identity and teaching of their new one. Before there were African Americans, there were Black Americans. Before Black Americans, there were just Americans. Obviously in there's Negro and, all these other terms. During the early colonialist era of America, Native Americans were enslaved and made to work on the plantations. When they were taught their history of being the original people of the nation, they would revolt and burn down the plantations. The slave masters realized if they taught these natives that they were in fact Africans brought over to the New World for opportunities in a more civilized society, the chances of revolt were minimized. Let me extrapolate on that real quick in case I didn't in there. Now, I'm not saying that Black people are Native Americans. I'm saying they were doing it to both. They were doing it to the Indians. They were doing it to the Blacks. I'm sure this little bit's in there, but red-boned, light-skinned. What's the other term? There's another term like red-boned that's completely disappeared. But it's why you have these specials with like Lil Wayne and Snoop Dogg getting their DNA test and finding out they're like a quarter Native American or something. So they did it to both groups and they mixed the two up together. And then they basically told the Native Americans that everyone there was from Africa and that they should be happy they're a slave on a plantation and stuff. So that's how you sort of had those two histories get erased and then merged into one, where a lot of African American people have a lot of Native American DNA in them. Rosa Parks like vehemently was like, "I have nothing to do with Africa. I'm American. And she was a large part Native American, which just shows how stupid all of this group identity shit really is. Let's see. This is why Americans have been systematically divided, labeled, and relabeled. Black Americans have become Black communities to detach them from a sense of nationalism and patriotism. Americans of all races are told patriotism and nationalism can be dangerous. This message is amplified by Jewish interest groups using the acts of Hitler's socialist expansions throughout Europe as rationale. But the reality is, Hitler was an internationalist, and the expansion of Nazism through Europe shows he wasn't concerned with staying confined to Germany. This is a point Candace Owens made and got a lot of flack for, trying to point out Hitler wasn't a nationalist. He was trying to enlarge and, basically conquer Europe. He wanted the EU. That was his little brainchild. The lengths in which those in power will go to uphold this farce include bringing outspoken Black conservatives, Candace Owens, to testify in front of elected officials. See, I'm doing what I said I tried not to. I'm extrapolating, and I had already written this. Candace Owens testify in front of elected officials who sought to berate her for comments on Hitler not being a nationalist. This is why when Donald Trump began talking about putting America first and being a nationalist, the Jewish-owned media immediately began comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. At home, while Israel, comparing Donald Trump to Hitler at home, while Israeli support for Trump grew due to his staunch support of the nation. The basic reality of the situation is it should be expected that the leader of any nation would put the needs of their nation first. Only an extremist looking to undermine and weaken a nation's stability would expect otherwise. In regards to Nazism in America, anyone who has been paying attention to the past 20 or so years would notice Barack Obama's socialist leanings were often dismissed and scoffed at as coded racist messaging. His defenders declared that an American socialist as a president was unrealistic and beyond the pale because America went to war and defeated socialism. However, not even a decade later, Bernie Sanders and AOC declare themselves democratic socialists proudly. This is why the left must focus on the national aspect of Germany's national socialism and not the socialism part. One of the double-edged swords of America's identity is the fact that it is a younger nation based on ideas and principles enshrined in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. It's not based on bloodlines and race like all other nations, despite what liberal Marxist professors have taught. Democrat politicians such as Tim Kaine and activists like Ta-Nehisi Coates claim America didn't inherit slavery, it created it. This view basically ignores centuries of human history and should be met with nothing but endless laughter and ridicule. The only aspect of slavery that is exclusive to America and white Western countries is the fight to end it. There are more people in slavery in modern times than there was during America's founding, and while socialist Democrats and communist academics will convince you capitalism is slavery, and working a job to provide for yourself and your family is exploitation, they turn a blind eye to modern-day injustices. For example, China with their Muslim labor camps and, child labor, and all of the majority of the giant corporations like Amazon that back Black Lives Matter use slave labor. So the money they are giving to Black Lives Matter is coming from their slave operations in other countries. Let that sink in. This is the reality of it. Black Lives Matter is funded by slavery in other countries. That's all there is to it. While the ideals America was founded upon have not always been lived up to, because as people we are all flawed and imperfect, they are what Americans should strive to achieve. Every other nation on earth is based on a race. China is for the Chinese people, Israel is for the Jewish people, Syria is for the Syrians, and Russia for the Russians. America has always had the goal of e pluribus unum, from many come one. In order to create conflicts and divides in America, a standard had to be imposed upon America and other Western nations to reject integration as racism and promote diversity and cultural relativism to a point of chaos. Everything that used to unite Americans of all backgrounds, like the Enlightenment principles of self-ownership and private property, to the Christian view that we are all children of God, made in His image, have been relabeled as hateful, white supremacy, used to oppress minorities. In this void, political correctness has taken root and has grown into a religion of its own. From many come one has been replaced with diversity as our strength. The concept that differences can create unity, which is the underlying implication, is so absurdly false that it needs constant reinforcement and punishment for its heretics. Now, on this, I'm obviously not. I also do believe unity is a euphemism for conformity. So that's the only way you can achieve unity, is to force everyone to conform, which is also awful. I'm for individualism. People should, as a country, we need to agree on certain things, but everyone should be cool to do their own thing. It's funny though, when I said taking root, I meant to bring up in this picture behind me, the Black History Month. Yeah, I find it very interesting. The tree they have with the roots is very similar to the Charles Darwin cover of his book that eugenics came out of. So it's this weird sort of thing where like the symbolism of what was used for like the Tuskegee experiments and all this crazy, racism stuff in the 1950s with the progressive movement. You basically have the cover of the book that a lot of it started from being used in this picture for Black History Month. It was a little weird, but um, cultural relativism is a technique employed by postmodernists, Marxists, and liberals in order to rationalize unacceptable behavior by all reasonable standards to avoid being accused of racism. It is the idea of equality taken to the point of insanity. It abandons the idea that there is any sort of objective reality. This is where we can get claims like race and gender are social constructs, and women forced to live under impressive interpretations of Sharia law cannot be criticized because it's a different culture. One of the cultural relativists' primary mantras is diversity is our strength. Now, I do want to make clear, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with different people from different places bringing their views and ideas to the table to contribute to the growth and development of a nation. What I'm saying is when there's no underlying foundation or principles to join these people, it would be like trying to assemble a group of people to accomplish anything as a team while no two people speak the same language. If we cannot communicate clearly, agree on what is right and wrong, and hold each other to the same standard, diversity becomes a weakness, not a strength. This has been proved objectively in study after study. The academics teaching these warped theories have also created a mechanism to ensure division continues beyond discouraging integration into a national identity. They claim the embrace of practice of another culture is appropriation. So, if a Mexican moves to America and they become Americanized, well, they've been colonized. And if a white person is like, oh, I love this Mexican stuff, let me throw on a sombrero and eat tacos all day, well, that's cultural appropriation. So this political correctness is strictly to box everyone in. It is to limit you. And from those limits, when you step out of the box, that's when problems arise. This is a mechanism for conflict. There's no timeline or no series of events where this leads to unity. It is only for conflict. Cultural appropriation, defined as the unacknowledged or inappropriate adaptation of customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another, and typically more dominant people or society. That's word salad, sorry about that. There are countless problems with this concept besides its often selective application. First, who are you supposed to acknowledge your appropriations to? If a white person wants to open a taco shop, do they need permission from a Mexican, all Mexicans, or just certain Mexicans? Who decides what practices are appropriate and inappropriate? I've heard it's inappropriate for white people to wear dreadlocks, but I haven't heard much about Beyonce's straight white blonde hair. Or straight blonde hair. Her white girl hair, basically. How are we supposed to embrace and celebrate our diversity when engaging in the customs or actions of another culture can be viewed as problematic? The other problem is, again, this is a collectivized mindset where accomplishments are not that of an individual or group of collaborators, but rather racial accomplishments, leading to a historical who-did-it-first battle that only displays profound ignorance of culture and history. While those claiming dreadlocks on whites is cultural appropriation of Black and Caribbean hairstyles, Norse Vikings and Celtic warriors are depicted as having dreadlocks long before any interactions took place with Jamaicans. During the early 2000s, comedian Dave Chappelle showed the comedy in these forms of racial claims with his sketch entitled The Racial Draft. While the sketch showed different nations claiming different people for themselves, It is just it it just as easily shows the destructive, limiting, and regressive nature enforcing something like cultural appropriation can have. During the sketch, an Asian representative chooses to pick the Wu-Tang Clan, the New York-based hip-hop group that was heavily influenced by Asian culture and martial arts. If the members of the Wu-Tang Clan followed the ideas of cultural appropriation and didn't embrace and draw influence from foreign cultures, they would not have the uniqueness and creative legacy that has made them hip-hop legends. It is this embrace of diversity and integration of it into other forms of culture and art that has progressed society and given us more commonality than division. So, that sums it up right there. Cultural appropriation is diversity. It is unity. When other cultures embrace the cultures of others, that's how we come together. We partake in, white people are not saying on St. Patrick's Day for black people to get out of here. They're saying, do you want to have a beer with me? It's really that simple. The idea that white people would be like, oh, you can't enjoy St. Patrick's Day, brownie, because white people are Irish, it's stupid. The other problem with this idea of everything and everyone being social constructs is it then leads to the social engineering of society by prescribing socially constructed identities to people. This is again the left's collectivist, anti-individualist worldview in action. The history of British, Dutch, Italians, Irish, and other Europeans that immigrated to America for a better life have been erased and homogenized into white. So that's one of the things where some of these problems are not exclusive to one group or another. This whole black-white thing, both of these groupings were done to white people and black people. And the only way to get beyond it is to reject it altogether, like Morgan Freeman in the clip we were just showing. The same people who claim to be fighting against the ghost of white supremacy then teach people that this white identity, or whiteness as they sometimes call it, comes with certain inherited advantages. Due to this being blatantly false in a nation founded on individualism, the advantages prescribed to this identity become increasingly esoteric and faith-based, relying on assumptions based on unequal outcomes that ignore an individual's actions and agencies. The same is true for black Americans. Terms I grew up hearing in black schools like red-boned or mulatto, that was the other term I was looking for, mulatto, which acknowledge the multiculturalism of black Americans, have been deemed politically incorrect. Red-skinned and red-boned are labeled offensive to Native Americans, or as they are now known, indigenous people, as is yellow for anyone of Asian descent. However, Americans, both black and white, are being grouped by their color and pitted against each other is politically correct. There's something I was just thinking that I wanted to add in there, but I can't. Oh, I remember real quickly. The other problem with, again, the stripping of individualism and this black community idea is basically it's so dehumanizing that in the grand scheme of things, if you accept yourself into one of these groups, you're basically giving up your personhood. If you're part of the black community, you're no longer John Doe, whoever. You're now black community member 2073. And the next one is black community member 2074. And everyone gets treated with this broad brush. The George Floyd thing is so crazy because you see the video of that guy, and it's amazing how the media can convince people, in my local area, that they should feel something for this guy, when if it was the crackhead in your local community that happened to, you'd be like, yeah, that's crackhead. He's just doing crackhead things. But on a grand scale, it's, because he becomes black community member 67402, well, then everyone's supposed to be, oh my God, this and that, because he's not your local crackhead. In reality, what everyone should have says, I don't know that dude. Why does this concern me? But that's, again, how people are being manipulated by a lot of this manufactured identity stuff. The black identity is by far one of the most destructive social constructs of these revolutionaries. Much like during the times of slavery, the people in power used their selected proper blacks as enforcers to keep the other blacks from leaving the mental plantation. The same American political party that fought for slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, and used to call blacks racial slurs now encourage their followers to denounce blacks that don't conform to their victim ideology as coons or Uncle Toms. This is the only place in modern America where racial slurs are viewed as acceptable. We are told to somehow believe America is a white supremacy where a white person who uses a racial slur at any point in their life can have that moment of their past return to ruin their future, and yet black Americans like Ben Carson, Candace Owens, and Kanye West are continually called slurs like coon, Oreo, Uncle Tom, or even called white supremacist or multiracial white supremacists themselves because of their lack of conformity to the socially constructed idea of blackness. When control of a group is the objective, any nonconformist must be attacked and delegitimized. In this case, without a shred of irony or self-awareness, privileged white academics attack and invalidate the identity and experiences of black people for not fitting their concept of what black should be. The most recent and blatant demonstration of the political left's ownership of blackness occurred when Joe Biden was interviewed by Charlemagne the God and claimed anyone who doesn't vote for him isn't black. And that's one of the things that I think my main goal with when I was putting this together was to realize that whiteness, blackness, these are very loaded political social constructs, and you shouldn't buy into something if you don't have ownership of it. This is one of the arguments I would get into with Res 1. And I mean, I love that dude. I love him. We butt heads, and we butt heads out of love. I mean, because we know each other only has good intentions. And when I was going to do this in a video form, I did want to have interviews with him about it. But, you know, he would be posting all of this Black Lives Matter stuff, and other informed black people would be like, dude, they're a communist organization that wants to get rid of the nuclear family and do all this other weirdo crazy shit. Like, you need to stop repping this. And again, you can be for black people and have an issue with a communist lesbian run weirdo group saying they represent black people. Like, they don't have a monopoly on black interests. But he would always be like, oh, well, this was the movement before they came around, and this and that, and the next thing, and when I say what it means to me, and this and that. And the way I always looked at it is, it would be like wearing booty shorts and a rainbow-colored shirt, walking around San Francisco like, hey, hey, and then when a dude comes up and grabs your butt, you get all uppity and you're like, oh, I'm not gay. What are you talking about? Why are you touching me like that? And it's like, oh, well, you were fucking signaling. You're signaling like a motherfucker, actually. So that's just my view on that. Like, if you're going to back this group, know what they're about. And if you're with it, you're with it. But really, the majority of black people are not with the fine print that comes along with that organization. So, continuing, Gavin McInnes has accurately summed up this political divide into two categories. Your conservative Republicans as people who want to be left alone, and liberals, leftists, and Democrats as those who won't leave anyone alone. This becomes more and more evident as the left has begun to attack and denounce people over what they aren't saying, with claims like white silence is violence. The political left has decided it is no longer acceptable to mind your own business. Everyone will be forced to agree with them by repeating their latest slogan, mantra, or protest chant in an effort of mass cult programming and virtue signaling, or else. We saw this with the kneeling. I mean, to say this is not taken on a religious cult-like component, well, why was everyone kneeling down like they're praying? Why? I mean, and then you have those Democrats wear the fucking the scarves of a slave trader cult like group in Africa. Like, it's when you know what's really going on, there is a very, I mean, people think it's dark and evil as it is at its face level, cartoon level. At like, when you really delve deep into it, the darkness of it is mind blowing. Mind blowing. And that's like one of the most troubling parts with people who've been misled by a lot of this white supremacy stuff and thinking like as Dick Gregory said, you've never met a white person. Black people, like, let me put it like this. As far as what I consider the actual white supremacy class, like, Obama might have brushed shoulders with them here and there. That's the level he's at in the ranking. Here and there. They might have let him tag along. I mean, that's how it really is. They might have let, like, the Queen invited him over for tea and then was like, get this nigger out of here. Like, that's what it's really like. I mean, we're talking Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and royalty. Harvard, Princeton, Yale. I mean, people that, the idea of borders, I mean, let me put it to you like this. You're never going to have a white supremacist travel on anything other than a private jet. That's a good baseline. If you've only traveled on private jets, you could be in the white supremacist class. But this idea that black people are being taught that the white people alongside them are the danger and the white supremacy, and it's people who can't even afford to go on a fucking family vacation, that's the problem. Anyway, sorry, I'm ranting. From socially constructed group identities replacing free individuals to cultural appropriation, these theories operate in a Marxist worldview where every action and reaction is viewed in a power struggle between the haves and the have-nots, between majorities and minorities. The oversimplified, reductionist worldview not only strips people of their personal agency and individual choices, it also turns everyone into a political pawn in the Marxist power game. This is what I was saying about Black community member number 27803. Like, you're just reduced into a pawn on this chessboard when you buy into this community game. Academics have created new terminology to indoctrinate people into how to perceive the world in this manner. However, because the Marxist goal is ultimate power, the rules will continually shift and change until the goals are accomplished. A white teenager wearing his hair in dreadlocks isn't a personal fashion choice. It's a political statement and a microaggression against the culture dreadlocks has been drafted to. Actions are given intentions without even bothering to ask the perpetrator for an explanation. On the odd occurrence, a chance for explanation is given. It can easily be dismissed as unconscious or subconscious racial bias or systemic. This is the true vile and evil nature of this ideology. It is so concerned with controlling the minds of people that it will try to control the thoughts people aren't having and will tell you you are having them so they can fix you and make you politically correct. This is why we've reached a point where the people that want to be left alone have to push back against those who won't leave them alone, because they are now trying to control people over the claims of what goes on in their unconscious minds. This manifests itself into a multi-layered mind control operation against all groups of people. Those it claims are the system's benefactors, and those it claims are its victims. With the divide being broken down this way, it also reflects the two parties in America, their view of the function of government. The right wing believes in a small government that there is to uphold the Constitution. The left, on the other hand, sees to see no limit in the role of government. COVID is the prime example. I mean, the government now wants to control how far you're standing next to someone. They believe the government's purpose is to provide healthcare, education, welfare, and more. They also believe wealth redistribution is justified for whatever their latest reason is. And of course, the redistribution always just goes from the lower and middle class up to the rich. I mean, look at these COVID stimulus bills. We're sending out fucking millions to other countries and everything else. And meanwhile, everyone's fighting over like $2,000 checks. This is also why communism and socialism are easily integrated into a leftist worldview. People are not viewed as individuals with personal agency, but rather a political pawn, a resource for redistribution, or a voter to be bought off by the resources taken from another. While the right-wing view is for equality of opportunity for individuals to shape their own race to the top, the left-wing views of equality is dragging everyone down to the lowest common denominator to achieve an equal outcome while they sit high and mighty above their own system. And that's, again, the people who are above the system. That's the white supremacy. The people that laws don't apply to. The people like your Jeffrey Epsteins. The people that go on vacation to foreign countries to commit crimes. That's white supremacy. The fucking sickos that are like, I want to have sex with a small child and murder them afterwards. Well, they're going to go to Africa or, some Asian island to do that. They're not going to, you don't shit where you eat. So again, the actual white supremacy class is so far above where people think the problem is that's why it's more of a class issue than anything. Well, the right-wing view is the lowest common denominator. To continue with the analogy of life being a race, to the left, if one of the participants in this race was missing a leg, they would demand everyone else cut off theirs in order to create equality so no one can be seen as having an unfair advantage. This belief in wealth redistribution can be seen all the way back to the Democrats being the pro-slavery party. They believe that certain people are entitled to the benefits of the work of others. Republicans have always believed the phrase, the hand that picks the corn gets to eat the corn. While we have been told stories of the Southern strategy where Republicans attempted to use racial messaging to win over racist Democrats in the South, the voting record does not reflect this as being successful. In attempts to keep their black voters stuck in the modern-day mental plantations, or as we now call them, ghettos, they tell stories of the parties switching, but in order to believe such a lie, you'd have to forget that these parties have any sort of principles and believe that the party's sole concern is black people and their role in society. The only switch in the parties was the Democrats changing from looking to colonize blacks for labors to organize blacks for votes. The Democrat president, LBJ, was quoted saying, "I'll have those niggers voting Democrat for the next 200 years. The Democrats' new welfare and economic dependency, incentivized by disabling black communities, would keep them voting for a party that had done nothing but cause them pain and suffering. While people doubt the validity of LBJ's quote, the validity of the voting is not up for dispute. The black Democrat voting bloc is a larger percent than any other ethnic group. No other group functions as such a monolith. So while the left will tell you it's racist to assume all black people look the same or act the same, the Democrat Party is dependent on all black people voting the same. Let's just let that sink in and process. So problem A, you have had black people basically browbeaten and mind controlled to the point where there is a political conformity that is unmatched. So, like I said, it's racist to assume all black people are the same, but in politics, it's a safe bet. And that's a bad thing. It is a bad thing. And that's where, like I was saying earlier, Ben Carson, Kanye West, Candace Owens, relentlessly attacked as coons. And that's because there's a group of people in power that are dependent on black people all thinking the same. Black people all feeling the same. Black people all voting the same. So they have to constantly reinforce that black people do not step out of line. Not at all. Because there's very powerful people that their power is dependent on keeping black people in line. If we look at slavery from a more economic standpoint, it begins to shed a new light on things. First, it starts to show the vile nature of collectivizing the guilt of a practice as a racial one when the average white person couldn't afford a slave. Slavery was only practiced by those who could afford it, much like today, where the wealthiest in society can afford butlers, maids, and various other services the average citizen cannot. The Democrat Party believed in taking people from foreign cultures into America, keeping them illiterate, and limiting their upward mobility, not giving them the rights afforded to them with citizenship, exploiting their labor to benefit those that were already rich, and teaching those under their control that they're doing them a favor throughout all of this. When they run the risk of rebellion and having those under their control turn against them and want independence, that's when they will begin to make concessions, but only in exchange for loyalty and votes. This is the current game they're playing with Hispanic Americans, or Hispanic immigrants. The new ethnic group they use for their land keepers, maids, nannies, field workers. They even rationalize these actions as they did slavery by statements as, they're doing the jobs no one else will do. These statements show that white supremacy is still alive and well in a party that sees essential labor needed for a functioning society to be below certain races and essential for others. So that's the white supremacy. Anyone who says the Mexicans are doing the jobs no one else will do, that's a white supremacist. That is a coded racial message. That's white supremacy. Thinking that there are certain jobs that are below white people, that's white supremacy. So Mexicans can do those jobs. White people don't do those. White Mexicans are supposed to be out in the fields picking strawberries. White people with their college degrees are supposed to be in offices and, lecture halls. Let's see, to the point where they will import populations of immigrants to displace the native-born minorities. And this is one of the things where, Hispanic immigration hurts black communities the most. From slavery to eugenics, white supremacy has always been a major tenet of the Democrat Party. However, the most troubling part is now, with their monopolistic control over all major institutions and rebranding of white supremacy into white privileges, they have indoctrinated black Americans into operating under white supremacy and fighting against those who seek to free them of these mental chains. If you have any doubts that white supremacy and white privileges are the exact same thing, I recommend you find situations where the phrases are used and swap them out for one another. And tell me if swap them out for one another and tell me if the context is altered in any way. To believe in one is to believe in the other. If you believe white people are superior, well, that would come with inherent privileges. If you believe white people benefit from unearned privileges in society, then they are superior to those who did not. Despite their best efforts, no amount of linguistic, rhetorical tricks, and three-syllable words from the halls of academia can change that. Most efforts to explain these privileges grow increasingly vague and circular in logic as they reach deeper and deeper, trying to convince themselves and others of the illusion. So, this is, again, if you believe that there's white privilege and white people have certain privileges, well, then you're a white supremacist. Read Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. She is the leading voice for white supremacy in America. Eugenics was another iteration of the left's white supremacy in action. The American eugenics movement, pushed by the progressive left's elite experts and scientists, pushed the idea of family planning and good genes and bad genes. Planned Parenthood's founder, Margaret Sanger, spoke at Klan rallies about her desire to eliminate inferior races and even sought to utilize black faith leaders to keep her murderous agenda under wraps. This eugenics movement in America was part of the inspiration for Hitler's ideas of Aryans being the perfect race, and they also took note from Nazis as well. Writing in 1938, when the Nazi program was in full swing, Sanger urged America to follow Hitler's example, using the language of social Darwinism. The language that Hitler uses in Mein Kampf, Sanger wrote, in animal industry, the poor stock is not allowed to breed. In garden, the weeds are kept down. America, Sanger concluded, must learn from the Nazis to carry out nature's own mandate of getting rid of human weeds. Hitler never quotes Margaret Sanger, but he was inspired by the writings of two of her associates, Leon Whitney of the American Eugenics Society and Madison Grant of the New York Zoological Society. During the 1930s, Whitney on one occasion visited Grant to proudly show him a letter he had received from Hitler requesting a copy of Whitney's book, The Case for Sterilization. Not to be outdone, Grant pulled out his own letter from Hitler, which praised Grant for writing The Passing of the Great Race, a book Hitler called his eugenic Bible. This incident shows how progressive eugenicists in America were well aware of their impact on Hitler and proud of their association with him. So, there is a bit of contention about, let's get it. Maybe I should save this for here. Liberals and progressives may try to indicate the whole of America. Liberals and progressives may try to indict the whole of America, past, present, and future, for the sins of the Democrat Party. However, they will run defense all day for Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood, despite its founders' racist beliefs and how they have been put into action. Despite all the flowery language about choice and hypotheticals about ultra-rare instances where abortions are wanted for cases of incest, the fact of the matter is, some years, in certain areas like New York, more black babies are aborted than born. Similar to the LBJ quote about blacks and voting, you can try all day to dismiss who said what, but the reality is the intentions behind these quotes have come to manifest. So, this right here, this is one of these things where people, and even people I respect, like Michael Malice, will try to clarify things about Sanger. How racist was she? Did she speak at Klan rallies? Did LBJ really say that quote about blacks voting for welfare? And that's all getting lost in the weeds. Because the reality is, the kids are getting aborted by the organization she started. People are voting that way at a rate that's unrivaled by other races. And, it's just fact of the matter. Now I've spent a great deal of time pointing back at the history, and most normal people would ask, what does this have to do with us now? Anyone living now is living in a far more privileged life than anyone else at any other point in history. We hear constantly from politicians and activists about the legacy of slavery and 400 years of oppression, but do we really think a slave could imagine a cell phone? 30 years from now, when I wanted to be a music producer, it would have cost tens of thousands of dollars of equipment and a studio space in order to do so, along with a record deal to get my music heard by the masses. Now all you need is $2,000 for a laptop and a microphone, and you can distribute your music yourself. That's privilege. We all in America have technological privilege. Every aspect of everyone's lives, from the richest of us to the poorest, has been improved by technology, and rather than being grateful for this, those that seek to control us try to use humanity's darkest moments as a reason to allow them to manipulate us. They encourage us to foster feelings of ungratefulness and helpfulness over our own lives to justify their imposition into our daily activities. Voltaire once wrote, "To find out who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize." If this is the case, it becomes apparent that white people are not in power, as any accusation can be leveled at them publicly without repercussion. If a white person says the wrong word to a person from another However, if a white person says the wrong word to a person from one of the protected minority groups, their life can be ruined. Paula Deen. There's just numerous examples. Papa John's, maybe, right? Didn't that happen with him? There is, however, one group that appears to most to be white that cannot be spoken of, positively or negatively. Besides the relationships and political power games played between liberal Democrats and their minority groups, there's one minority group that we have referenced that also has a complicated history with Black Americans, and that is Jews. While most may lump them into the white category, they don't see themselves as white. And they act politically for what is in their best interest collectively. The thing is, this isn't merely followers of the Abrahamic religion of Judaism we are speaking of. We are talking about the elite of the elite, international bankers, and other money movers who seek to dismiss the admission of reality as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. From the bookkeeping and financial aspects of the transatlantic slave trade to co-opting civil rights organizations and manipulation and discrimination in both entertainment and the news media, the internationalist Jews have constantly meddled in the affairs of Black Americans while hiding their wealth and power. Some conservative Black Americans have pointed out that in terms of oppressed minorities, Blacks could learn from the Jews in how to uplift themselves out of poverty. They note how you never see Jews marching around with a list of demands for government to fix. They organize and amass economic power and influence and use it to lobby and influence the governments of the world. This is not an indictment against Jews or me ascribing collective guilt, as I've illustrated is done with white Americans or America as a nation. I'm an individualist who believes in individual liberty and responsibility. This is, however, an attempt to show the dangers of collectivization and identity politics. Its inevitable consequence being to divide and conquer. The reality of the situation is, under political correctness, there's one group that is forbidden to approach politics from a collectivist tribal mentality, while all other racial and ethnic minority groups seem to advocate and enact policies in just this manner. To some extent, it always seems as if there is a well-organized legal and Jewish backing behind most civil rights NGOs and nonprofits, like the SPLC. The question to ask is, are these groups using the pain of Black Americans for their own benefit, or are they doing it out of legitimate concern? When you dig into finances of these groups, that question becomes a much larger concern, as it seems some are laughing their way to the bank while exploiting the oppression faced by others. With all of this established and our knowledge of political movements being co-opted and manipulated throughout history, we are now well equipped to take a well-informed look at Black Lives Matter, who runs it, what their objectives are, and who funded them, and who are the organizations that stand in defense of them. Black Lives Matter is said to have three founders. Alicia Garza, who grew up as Alicia Schwartz, Jewish girl, who then takes a Hispanic last name, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tomei. The latter of the three is credited with setting up the online presence of the group, but no longer active within the organization. For details on the movement and its founding, we will be going to two articles from LibertyLady1885.com. So those are two articles. I'm not going to get into them here because otherwise this thing would be just way too long. Knowing the history of these women and their troubled history with their own family, it starts to become obvious why they would gravitate towards ideologies such as liberation theology, intersectionalism, and communism, including concepts like destroying the nuclear family and wanting to establish the community as an extended family. Unfortunately, this collectivist idea of communal responsibility isn't just found in BLM. It's with us and presented in commercials such as Melissa Harris Perry for NBC. That's Melissa Harris Perry did this commercial, just if you don't know what I'm talking about, because again, this was going to have a video accompanying it, where she basically is like, we don't think about, things in terms of community. Like, it's not your kid, it's our kid. That's again where this gets into like a cult. Like, why are you trying to take ownership of someone else? Why do you need to have input into their business? It's just insane. But that's the underpinning of all of this. Everything's political, nothing's private, Everyone's all in everyone else's business. That's why we all had to be concerned about a crackhead dying in Minneapolis somewhere. I mean, it's tiresome, and it's not helping anyone except the people in power. Anyway, conservative commentator Gavin McInnes has even theorized this entire Black Lives Matter movement as nothing more than an overgrown fuck you dad to the system. And it's, again, if you know about these women that started the organization, they had issues with their fathers. Their father was, the one girl specifically, her father hated that she was a lesbian, and kicked her out of the house. So they all have these daddy issues. And basically the police act as the father figure for the community. You know, it's the don't let dad find out. Don't make me tell your dad. You don't want to get caught by the cops. The cops are the enforcer father figure for society. So I did a whole video on this about progressives pathologizing their personal problems into political issues. In this worldview, personal agency is ignored. Everyone is broken down into a political pawn in the supposed eyes of the system, but more so in the eyes of those seeking to install the intersectional worldview into the system. Patrisse Cullors, for example, is not Patrisse Cullors. She is a black, queer woman of color. While I'm reminded of this quote by Thomas Sowell, when people get used to preferential treatment, equal treatment seems like discrimination. In this instance, it becomes when people fight oppression. When people fight oppression when they've had equality, they inevitably fight to oppress others. If Black Americans are actually on equal footing with everyone else, equal opportunity, no outcomes, no equity, then any act to uplift them will eventually put them above all others. This is why personally I've always objected to any laws that are attached to any demographic, because this will always create an inequality. Hate speech laws are like that. There's a handful of ones that are like that. Like this whole protected group type thing. If you're going to make a law that murder is wrong, well, murder is wrong. Murder isn't extra bad if it's a gay person or a person of color. Murder is wrong. That's an equal thing. We can all say murder is wrong. Let's have a punishment for murder. But when you say, oh no, we're going to add extra punishments if you murder a gay person, well, then that's a privilege. They have an extra layer of protection. That's privileges. That's reality. However, if government has appointed itself as the arbiter of equality, and this is its methodology to achieve it, there will always be an excuse for growing the government and for it to amass more power and control to try to correct the wrongs it has previously made with the same failed strategies. This also ties back into what we said earlier about the foundational views of the purpose of government to the two parties. Is the government supposed to protect you and your private property, or is it supposed to infringe upon your rights and confiscate your private property and profits in an attempt to create fairness and some form of cosmic justice? We see this continually on the left as all of its attempts, like the war on poverty, government-run schools and education, welfare, and various other assistance programs, eventually end up with poorer people, undereducated populations, and cyclical dependency. This, again, is great for the government, and it keeps their business booming, while all those it was seeking to help become increasingly disenfranchised. The politics will scapegoat their blame onto white people, America, history, and anything but their own policies. And the answer is always more money and power for the people that have been failing their way to the top. That too is actual white supremacy. When you can fail at everything and just get richer and more powerful. I mean, look at Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden is the world's most balling crackhead. Like, he just flies around on private jets, smoking crack, banging prostitutes, and leaving with bundles of money. That's white supremacy. It, however, is becoming increasingly harder and harder to deny, though, the areas where Black Americans seem to be in the worst positions. With the least amount of opportunities are the Democratic strongholds like California, New York, Detroit, Chicago, etc. And this is again why Black Lives Matter is useful with their 4-year leap year cycles, because they're going to rile everyone up emotionally and get you to keep voting for the status quo, to continually sign off on your misery. I hate to be blunt with you, but Black America, that's the purpose of Black Lives Matter. It's to get you in such an emotional state that you're not thinking clearly, that you every 4 years sign off on keeping the people that are screwing you in place. You're co-signing this shit. That's what Black Lives Matter is there for. It's to work you up emotionally so you're not thinking clear about how the policies pan out and everything like that. And it's for them to manipulate you into co-signing this bullshit. The leaders of these areas have been successful in placing blame on anyone but themselves when the likes of a conservative Republican isn't anywhere to be found, let alone in a position of power or influence. Again, think about that. These people will tell you all day long, Republicans are your enemy, Republicans are why your life sucks, Republicans are the ones keeping you down and this and that. And in the places where things are the worst for Black people, there isn't a fucking Republican in sight. So how is this happening exactly? How is the Republican responsible for everyone when there isn't one around? And yet, it's all these Democrats controlling everything, and then everything sucks, and then Black people co-sign the Democrats over and over again at a rate that no other group votes solely for one group in like a 80-90% fashion. Anyway, one of the techniques I would like to spend some time focusing now on is the use of language and how it can be used deceptively and mislead and manipulate people. Sometimes politicians will invent phrases like assault weapon or assault rifle, which is not a classification of firearm, but it's a political term. Considering all weapons are capable of assault, when a politician proposes an assault weapon ban, we must ask, which weapons are that exactly? Which weapon is that exactly? If it's not the creation of a new term, it is generally a positive word that the majority of people would agree upon, like justice, but with a modifier, social justice. This is no longer justice as we know it, and it becomes increasingly vague and up to interpretation. As defined by Wikipedia, social justice is a concept of fair and just relations between individuals and society. So again, it's this not minding your own business justice. That's what social justice is. Social justice is I'm in everyone else's business and I'm going to try to run their lives, as measured by the distribution of wealth, opportunities for personal activity, and social privileges. Now, here's the other thing is there is a overemphasis on wealth. And I go back and forth on this because I do agree that there's a white supremacist rich elite class that I mean, they own the money printers basically. But you doom yourself by thinking happiness is found in materialism and that everything is based on wealth. Now, everyone should be able to have a basic standard of living. That I agree with, obviously. But I don't like getting too caught in the materialism, who has this, this, and that, because then you're feeding into envy and jealousy and all these negative emotions. And the problem is that there's a whole set of politics based on fueling those negative emotions. And also, if there, the existence of social justice is a active undermining of justice. Its existence is the proof of that, because if justice was enough, you wouldn't need social justice. You would just have justice. So if you're having to modify the word like that, well, then you're trying to alter what everyone else would consider justice. You know, like here's a great example. When, in terms of political correctness, when Twitter and Facebook censor and ban conservatives like Candace Owens, Milo Yiannopoulos, Alex Jones, everyone says that's a private business, that's a private platform. If they don't want them in their business or whatever, that's fine. That's justice under the law because that's business law. When a baker doesn't want to bake a gay wedding cake, just one guy with his little mom and pop bakery, well, social justice decides that's beyond the pale. We need to go after them, this and that. Now, my stance on that has always been I'm a DJ. If I was asked to do any wedding, straight, gay, whatever, and I don't want to do the gig, I have the right to say no, and you're not entitled to a reason. And that's the problem with all this social justice of unconscious bias, all of this other stuff. Fuck you for even wondering what the reason is. Mind your own business. Social justice is the political act of being in everyone's business all the time. Day and night, what they're thinking, what they're subconscious, what's going on in there. I mean, it's insane. It really is. How things like social privileges are defined and quantified becomes increasingly nonsensical. Yeah, I mean, people have made jokes about this, that the ultimate form of, my experience, my truth would be like disabled, Muslim, gay, trans, just all the minority groups, just, you could just tack it all together and they should have the most divine authority to speak on anything. And, one thing real quick, because I know this is the end here. Part of the reason why I'm doing this, and I offered to help my friends that are doing their Black History Month series, and I'm going to send this to them, because again, I think I have a unique perspective. My family, all the future generation of my family is all black. I've grown up, basically, like I said, shouted out as the realest nigga here on a rap song. Most people that know me would be like, he's the blackest white boy, this and that. But the people that understand it know it's in an attitude. Like, that's why I get along with, like, older black men into, like, Nation of Islam and, 33rd degree Princeton Town Hall Masons, because it's that sort of street smart, real recognize real type thing. But when I see groups, and you could say this about any group really, that is sort of like, well, let's talk about ourselves and our history and our experience and this and that, and just doing it all amongst themselves, you kind of run the risk of, being a fish in water and asking them to explain water, and they don't know anything else but the water. So that's just where I think I factor into these things. So anyway, because I'm sure there's going to be someone in the comments anyway that's just going to be like, fuck this fucking white boy, whatever. Yeah, go eat a dick. Okay, social justice is a concept of fair and blah, 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 blah. During the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, this became abundantly clear. While the officer Derek Chauvin was arrested and we awaited the case to be brought to trial, in the justice system most view as being just, calls for justice were continuing. But these calls were coming from people who disregarded the justice system as inherently evil and oppressive. As the situation developed, we have seen videos of looters and rioters, which I just want to say, again, power is power. Whether it's Black Lives Matter or the Capitol thing with the Trump supporters or the 1960s with civil rights, when you have a protest movement and then there's like a handful of bad actors that fuck shit up to delegitimize the whole group, they're probably a Fed. We've seen this with the Capitol riots where everyone who's been arrested, like it turns out they're all a bunch of fucking federal agents and shit. So I'm not condemning any of the groups over the looting and rioting. I think there's another level to all of that. But as the situation, you have had people on the sidelines, though, that are like, fucking looting a Target is reparations. That's ignorant shit. As the situation developed, we have seen videos of looters and rioters claiming they wanted not only a figurative eye for an eye, but 2 for 1. We have also seen justice take the form of defunding and abolition of police in general. So yeah, this is a thing that I would go to people, and when there are these continual calls for justice, I would have to remind these sort of well-meaning normie white people that would be like, "Oh, well, they just want justice." And I'd be like, "Yeah, but they think your whole system is illegitimate, racist, and evil. So, are you sure you know what their definition of justice is?" And this is, again, it's all in the fine print. Black lives matter. Oh yeah, sounds nice. Black people should matter. I mean, I don't personally believe it. I believe no lives matter. I believe you're only as important as you make yourself out to be. You're not you don't you're not you're not entitled to my concern, my care, or any of that. People earn that. There are black people I love, and they've earned that love. But I don't have general love for anyone. I don't have any people or a community, or there's me, there's my family, there's my friends. That's it. Keep it simple. I don't need to be in everyone's business. So, this was the point in which average Americans who agreed justice needed to be served started to lose touch with what was really going on here. However, with knowing the ideological foundation here, it all makes perfect sense. If you reduce people down to personal and societal interactions concerning wealth, opportunities, social privileges, and remove the idea of personal agency and accountability, then everything becomes a matter of stimulus and response. This is where the excuse of socioeconomics come into play. We see it wherever the concept of crime in black communities is even remotely alluded to. This remark should be scoffed at and ridiculed because, as the saying goes, crime doesn't pay. Murder and rape isn't going to increase anyone's bank account or credit score. However, because of this view, when personal responsibility is removed, jail is no longer viewed as a punishment for breaking the law, but a place for rehabilitation. If crimes are a response to a sort of stimulus produced by society, social workers seem like a reasonable replacement for police. Now, this is where I left off on working on this, so I just want to cap it off with a few statements delving into these last little bits here. So, as far as the stimulus response thing, that's again what I was saying about Black Lives Matter and them popping up every 4 years and hyping things up and getting everyone all emotional. That's the stimulus, and the response is vote Democrat, because that's where the money goes. All the money they get, it goes to all these vote blue groups and everything else. So that's the stimulus response. It's basically fear, they're coming to get you, everyone's against you, we're here for you, vote for us. And as far as this socioeconomic thing, black people should really take offense to that, because this is, again, another one of these things that's like coded white supremacy, where they're basically saying, yeah, black people are so dumb that like they think like crime is going to help them financially. I don't know any black person that thinks that way in the first place, but it's a very detached view, and it's like this warped weird racism to think like a white rapist is doing this because they're evil, and it might be a crime of passion or rage or something like that, and the whole reason why a black person would commit a crime is because they're poor. It doesn't even link up. Like, you're removing agency, and you're just basically saying, well, there isn't enough money in their bank account, so that's why they got into a bar fight. I don't even know. Like, this guy was poor, so he shot up a school, like socioeconomics. But when do you ever hear that explanation given for white people? You would never hear them be like, oh, there was a school shooter. What was his economic status like? So that's another one of these weird sort of areas where it's like, that's the reason for the blacks, but everyone else is entitled to like complicated, complex reasons that they'll delve into all day, when we're just supposed to view black people as like this money pit or something. Like, it's so disgusting. So anyway, one of the big points I really wanted to stress again was the idea of the white supremacy class being those on private jets, those that fail upwards, and things like that. Kanye West talked about it a little bit in some interviews. Might have been his one with Nick Cannon, and maybe the Joe Rogan one too, where he talked about how Forbes would talk about him like he is a black billionaire, and he's like, why am I not just a billionaire? Why are you segregating me and stuff? And that's where I think the Morgan Freeman clip is really really important, because that's the view I've always held, and I think a lot of us, unless we've been really drilled into, think that way. Like, I don't view myself by my race or sexual orientation or any of that. Like, I'm just Jamie. That's all there is to it. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. That might change, but I'm Jamie, though, and I'm whatever form Jamie takes today, tomorrow, and the next day. And I think that's a much healthier way to look at things. Another whole avenue that I think is really, really interesting to delve into here is the idea of corporate white supremacy culturally appropriating black culture and weaponizing it against them. I mean, this just happens over and over. Hip hop is a great example. With things Dave Chappelle has talked about with the wanting black men to wear dresses, demasculating them, emasculating them. You've had Cat Williams talk about these Illuminati parties where you'll see the most masculine, like, machismo guy in a room fucking another guy. And I mean, the speculation into that is, I mean, if you think of the implications of what he's saying, what he's basically saying is you go to these parties and you might see Kevin Hart taking it in the ass from The Rock, while there's like a rich Jewish studio exec sitting behind. Like, think these Harvey Weinstein stories, Bill Cosby type things. But again, this is the casting couch, power plays, and black people have it worst of all. There was hip hop music that got weaponized into rap. Rick Ross, I mean, he's a fucking cop. And when it became exposed that he was a cop, the industry doubled down on backing him. Like, one of the things that I think, again, I could do a whole other video on this. You should assume everything coming to you from the top of the charts, the Grammys, Hollywood production, all that stuff is mental poison. It's bad for you. It's not doing anything good for you. So that's Tyler Perry. That's all garbage meant to emasculate. One of the other things, and I know people are really going to hate this, but this is, again, something they do to all races. And there's this occult thing going on. So, all right, first we have to accept that the majority of high-paying black actors that you see, and some musicians too, that you see in Hollywood are either in the closet. Whole books have been written on this. Dr. Dre, Notorious B.I.G., Tupac, I've heard rumors about. I mean, we know these rumors about white people. Brad Pitt. I knew about Kevin Spacey years ago, and then everything I went around telling people came out in the news. Marlon Brando, James Dean. I mean, there's just countless people. Tom Cruise, Will Smith. They're all in the closet. And some of it isn't even... Some of it could be that, and some of it's also like power control, again, like casting couch type stuff. But okay, so we first have to accept that the actual white supremacy class is invested in emasculating black people and, wants to take these predominant celebrity black men and make them cross-dress. It's a ritual, it's a hazing, it's basically your induction into the lower level of the club or the Illuminati or whatever. So, if they're already into this whole cross-dressing thing, well then there starts to be the trans issue. And that's where the Joan Rivers controversy about Michelle Obama comes in. Because again, if you really believe there's this white supremacy class that is above everything, the private jets, the going on vacation to murder people type, then the ultimate form of that black man in a dress, your Terry Crews, or whoever it is this day that Dave Chappelle again talks about this. The ultimate form of that would be to have the first black president and the wife basically be the black Caitlyn Jenner. And I'm not even saying that it's her specifically. I've seen videos where people debate this about Blue Ivy. Jay-Z's another one. Jay-Z is as gay as it comes, and it really makes me wonder about Beyonce. And that's the thing, though, about this group, is if their starting point is already, let's take all of these, successful black men and, ridicule them and humiliate them by making them cross-dress. Well, what's the next level of that? Well, the next level of that would be presenting trans people as the, sex they want to be or whatever. So, and I don't think this is a strictly black people thing. I think they do this with white people as well. I've heard people debate if Jennifer Aniston is actually a man, or so many of these people. I mean, there's again, it's a dark rabbit hole. There's so much on YouTube about it that I think some of it's just clutter to dismiss the actual ones. But what you would want to do is you would want to present a trans woman as a real woman, and let alone the pinnacle of womanhood and all. Like I always joked around that if it actually came out that Michelle Obama was a man, you'd have a day of mass black suicide, because you've had all these black men that have Michelle, there was a comedian saying, you can tell Michelle Obama's a real black woman. She smells like shea butter and coconut oil or whatever. And it's like all of these people that have just been beaten over the head that's a black woman. That is the definitive black woman, this and that. If it ever comes out, because again, if we're talking about this super evil system of white supremacy that's seeped into every system, why would it not? Why would it not? And that's one of the things that, again, I could do a whole other video on this, is that you can't tell me that there is this super evil system at the 1% level, at the very tippy top, even over the 1% system. Again, it's the people who control the money printing. You can't tell me that they exist, and yet they're just allowing these honest, heroes that were the greatest of their whatever, whether it's your singers or your Beyoncés or your Rihannas or whoever it may be, that they were just the best they were at what they were, and they decided to let a few black people into the club. No. There's a reason they are all there. Beyonce is not Beyonce Knowles. Beyonce is Beyonce Inc., and there is a team behind her. It's all part of the system. Professor Griff has talked about this. Numerous people have talked about this, that the black culture, what happens is black people will create something, and then it gets co-opted and weaponized against them. Again, Rick Ross was a cop, it got exposed, and what happened? The industry doubled down on backing him. There's the letter that went out about hip-hop music being used to promote criminal behavior for the private prison industry. So the entertainment and media aspect is a whole other can of worms to get into. And it's really sad, because a lot of what's viewed as black and this black culture stuff is not. It's a warped CIA weaponized interpretation of black culture used to demoralize and to keep black people in a sort of base emotional state, whether that be anger, rage, or sexual obsession with twerking and stuff like that. Which again, I'm not saying that it's a blanket, this is a bad thing. Sure, go out to a club, have some fun, but Cardi B doesn't let her kids listen to her music. And to some extent, I look at some of these things as, they say you are what you eat. And we should be mindful of what we put into our bodies, but we don't just consume with our mouths. We consume with our eyes, we consume with our ears, and you should be mindful of what you put into your, senses and take in that way. And if you don't think something is appropriate for a child, maybe you should ask how appropriate it really is for you. So yeah, like I said, I could do a whole nother thing. We're about to go into an hour and a half, but this was my White Boy Presents Black History Month special. So follow me, echoscape.locals.com. That's where you can support me. You can donate crypto. Jamie Star Music on Twitter. Follow any of my channels. And take care, everyone.